Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com.
Also, the Amanda Lester Detective Book Series for Teens and Tweens by writing show host and producer Paula Berenstein, introducing Sherlock Holmes for the next generation. Find out more at amandalester.net.
And the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Subscriptions available at bakerstreetjournal.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 99. Chris Redmond.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Hi. Welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the world's first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees, where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
And I'm Burt Wolder.
And it is our pleasure, our distinct honor, to welcome you back to the show, or to the show, if this is your first time here, on our 99th episode.
Yes, thank you for coming back. And by the way, I like what you've done with your hair.
Well, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I spent all night on it.
That part in the middle is very attractive.
Technically, I spent all night sleeping on it.
Oh, dear.
Well, it is now late June, early July. We are off to another summer here. Of course, this is an evergreen show, so if you're listening to us in the middle of winter, we don't fault you for that.
Yes.
If you're walking on a treadmill, if you're riding a bike, if you're stuck in traffic somewhere, we're here to keep you company.
Yes, and if you're stuck in traffic while you're on your treadmill and it's the middle of winter, do us a favor, put on some shorts because it's July here and we're too warm.
Well, this is great. We have an opportunity today to speak with one of the legends of the Sherlockian world, certainly from an online perspective, and we're looking forward to diving right in with him. Now, if we can remind you to do a couple of things on our behalf. One, we have a survey out, which we mentioned on the last show. If you go to ihearofsherlock.com, there's a big computer-looking icon in the upper right-hand corner there of the website. Click on that. That'll take you over to a survey. You can also go to ihose.co/ihose-survey. That's ihose.co/ihose-survey, all lowercase. That'll take you to a site that is designed to help us get feedback on the show and is also designed to get anonymous data on who you are, what you do, what you like to do, some demographics about where you live, age, income, things like that. Again, anonymized stuff, but it's designed so that our sponsors can understand who you are and what they're spending their very good money on, and will help us become a better program as a result. So head on over and take that survey and help us out. The other thing is, of course, if you do wish to get in touch with us, there are lots of ways to go about doing that. You start with ihearofsherlock.com, and you can find every link you need from there. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Tumblr. We're even on Snapchat and Instagram. How about that? Wow. We're not there 24/7 because, frankly, that would be exhausting. But if you reach out to us there, if you follow us there, we will certainly pay attention and thank you for it. We love hearing back from you.
Yeah. And, of course, once our Bangalore call center comes online, we will be available 24/7.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too.
I really am. And because it's outsourced, it only costs pennies on the dollar.
Rupees on the dollar.
Rupees on the dollar. Yes, our Pondicherry lodgers will be handling that sense for us. So, that being said, let's take a moment before we get to Chris Redmond and hear from one of our sponsors. And now we have the final entry in the Amanda Lester Detective Sponsorship Series. They've been with us for 6 months now. We appreciate the sponsorship. Well, now we bring you the final 2 characters to introduce you to. First, Gaston Thrillkill is the headmaster at the detective school. A Frenchman, he's a locked room mystery expert, and he baffles the kids by carrying a hairdryer with him everywhere he goes during the winter. The reason? There's something you might not expect. Thrillkill is a gruff, stern, and no-nonsense leader, but he has a soft side, too. You just have to wait for it to emerge. And then Blixis Moriarty is the great-great-grandnephew of James Moriarty. He's a tall, elegant man with ice blue eyes and salt and pepper hair. He runs the largest criminal cartel in the UK, and like everyone else in the books, he has a secret. Stay tuned for these and other characters in the Amanda Lester Detective Book Series. Find out more at amandalester.net. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are so excited to have, as I said, a legend of the online Sherlockian world. Christopher Redmond is best known as the proprietor of Sherlockian.net. If you have done anything online in the last 20 years with regards to Sherlock Holmes, you will have come across Sherlockian.net. It is a central jumping off point for all things related to Sherlock Holmes, and perhaps considered the premier Holmesian website. He's also a prolific author. And, of course, you may know him from such titles as In Bed with Sherlock Holmes, Sexual Elements in Arthur Conan Doyle's Stories, The Great Detective. Also, Welcome to America, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. And, of course, the equally as legendary A Sherlock Holmes Handbook. He served as the editor of Canadian Holmes, the magazine of the bootmakers of Toronto. He, of course, is a master bootmaker as well as a Baker Street irregular. And we're here to talk with him about some new projects and to really pick his big, juicy brain. With that all said, Chris Redmond, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me into the 21st century.
Oh, come on. I mean, you've laid a path to the 21st century with your site.
An astonishing amount of that website is last century. Fortunately, not 19th century, but some of it is venerable. Not everything changes rapidly in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
Well, it is always 1895, right?
Precisely.
There we go. So let's begin at the beginning, shall we? And we do want to talk about your web work and your books and whatnot. But let's go all the way back to when you first encountered Sherlock Holmes.
Well, my first recollection of Sherlock Holmes was reading The Hound of the Baskervilles on a blanket in a backyard on a sunny summer afternoon. I must have been 12, something of that sort. In those days, that was what 12-year-olds did, was they read Sherlock Holmes. Most people grew out of it. I never grew out of it.
Well, we're thankful for that. Now, where was that backyard located?
That backyard was in Lawrence, Kansas, the home of the University of Kansas, where my father was working.
I see. Now, most people know you as a Canadian. Are you American by birth?
I am Canadian by birth. I was born in Nova Scotia, which is also mentioned in the Sherlockian canon, but lived in the United States for a few years during some of my formative times.
Now, remind us where Nova Scotia is mentioned.
Nova Scotia is in the Copper Beaches. The young lady in the Copper Beaches is looking for a position as governess because her previous employer had gone to Nova Scotia. It's a fairly wispy mention, but you've got to seize onto anything you can.
Interesting. That would be Violet Hunter.
It would.
Former employer went to... I had never known.
Colonel Spence Monroe.
I remember the name, yeah.
Who went to Halifax, and Halifax, the capital of Nova Scotia, well, still is a major naval center, major military center. And the Sherlockian Society in Nova Scotia is the Spence Monroes in his honor.
Well, that makes entirely too much sense. So, being a Canadian, both by birth and extraction, does that mean you've been a Sherlockian ambassador around the provinces?
Well, I've done a little bit of public speaking in various contexts, but it hasn't been something that I've gone out campaigning for. The Bootmakers of Toronto, which is the Central Canadian Society, has had over its 40-some years a good deal of publicity. It seems to be something that attracts newspapers and other kind of media, as anything Sherlockian does, I suppose. So I haven't had to be putting in effort to get public attention. Sherlock Holmes gets a lot of attention in Toronto, which is the home of the Arthur Conan Doyle collection at the Toronto Public Library, a major public investment and public institution.
Now, that collection, how much of that collection was, let's say, inspired by or encouraged by or even designed by the bootmakers or their presence in Toronto?
It was the other way around. The library formed the collection and organized a weekend symposium in 1971 to celebrate the opening of the collection. And people at the symposium, including some prominent American Sherlockians, were so keen on the collection and so keen on being together in Toronto that they decided to start a society.
Interesting. And who were some of the founding members, if you're able to name them off the top of your head?
The central person in the founding of the Bootmakers and the central person in the collection was Cameron Hollier, who was a librarian at the Toronto Public Library and became the curator of the ACD collection. There were other notable Sherlockians involved. Tupper Bigelow, who was a Toronto judge and a Baker Street irregular, at that time was the only Canadian Baker Street irregular.
Interesting.
David Skeen Melvin.
Yeah.
Hartley Nathan, people of that sort.
Yeah. Legends.
Indeed.
So by that time, you were already well on your way to Sherlockian scholarship and activity and whatnot. Where did you first encounter other people that had this interest or discover that they existed elsewhere?
Well, being the sort of person who haunts libraries, I quickly, having used up the 60 Sherlock Holmes stories, looked for more in libraries, found that there was a great deal more, especially in the University of Kansas library. Discovered there was a Baker Street Journal, subscribed to the Baker Street Journal, and through it discovered that there were people in Kansas City, about 30 miles from Lawrence, starting a society. So that was my first connection to the larger Sherlockian world.
And Chris, what did, you mentioned your father was at the University of Kansas. What was he an academic?
He was a librarian. He was at the beginning of his career, a chemist, and then a chemistry librarian, and eventually a library administrator.
Huh. And what did your specialty, with that sort of upbringing and your haunting of libraries, what did your professional specialty become?
Well, I started off intending to be a chemist also. I was turned off by a bad high school teacher, which has always been one of my crusades since then, that high school teachers can turn people off as easily as they can turn people onto things. I ended up at Queen's University, which is in Ontario, majoring in English literature, mostly medieval literature. I did nothing Sherlockian as an undergraduate, but ended up with a degree in English, went into institutional journalism, which is a branch of public relations, and spent my 40-year career hammering out words, first on typewriters and then on computer keyboards.
Well, but that's wonderful because, of course, I spent a lot of my career in PR too, but it's a profession where you write every day. I mean, you may not be completely enamored of what you're writing, but you're writing every day. Something.
Yes. The words just keep coming. I once tried to calculate or to estimate how many words I might have written in the course of my career. Although it was in the millions, I really have no idea how many millions.
Huh. I tracked the amount of words I wrote one month, and it was 25,000. And I decided not to track it anymore.
Eventually you get faster and more fluent.
Yeah, and eventually you produce sometimes more, at least in my case, more and more piles of drivel. But
undoubtedly, but at least it's articulate and correctly punctuated.
Yes,
that is true.
Yes, there were subjects and predicates, there were nouns and verbs, the sentences were short, the paragraphs made sense. It was beautifully organized.
All of those frivolities.
So, Chris, last time we were together, you recounted how you had brought the university up to speed on the internet by creating some daily news summaries or whatnot? Could you talk a little bit about that?
I had been working as editor of the university's weekly newspaper, among other writing activities, and after a while it seemed that weekly wasn't often enough to keep people informed, and there was this new thing called the internet. And in 1993, we created a daily morning internet news report called the Daily Bulletin, which in retrospect was one of the first blogs anywhere. It was issued every working day from May 1993. I edited it up until my retirement 4 years ago, and it's still coming out every morning, every working day.
93, boy, that's early.
That's, right on the cusp of the internet, really. I mean, technically it goes back to the 70s, but yeah.
It was only in 93 that there was anybody at the other end to read what was put on the internet. That was the distinctive thing.
Well, we still wonder that on our site. So, yeah.
We were really inventing how do you put news on the internet in a way that it will catch people's attention and people will read it.
Yeah. So what are some of the lessons that you learned by doing that?
Don't be afraid to make mistakes is the number one lesson that I draw from that.
That's a good.
If you wait until you know it's perfect, you're going to be too late.
Well, I think the internet has certainly taken your lesson to heart.
Yep.
So you can tick that one off the box. Yeah, got it.
Yep. Achieved that one, yes.
Yeah.
So when did these two disparate threads in your life, your professional journalism interest and your interest in Sherlock Holmes and the online space, when did they collide?
Right at the beginning of the internet again. It was, I believe, the same year that we were creating the Daily Bulletin. Initially on a technology called Gopher, because the web was not really available outside experimental environments yet. The first year or so of the Daily Bulletin, it was all text with a Gopher interface, but the web was coming, and it became clear that I was going to have to know something about creating web pages. And really, I used Sherlock Holmes as my playpen to learn how a web page worked and how it could be developed.
So in those days, were you doing things like, BBS, or you were not that early? You were, actually creating one of the first websites with particular.
I wasn't
content.
doing BBS because the university has central mainframes and networks, and BBSs are more suitable for remote locations connecting over phone lines. But Gopher was a very similar technology.
Is that stuff from the early days still available if we wanted to find some of it online? Is it still, or is it lost in the dust of history?
I believe Gopher still exists and is still supported. As the name might suggest, it comes out of the University of Minnesota. in their that must be in their pre-Sherlock Holmes days, but those are clearly the University of Minnesota's two great contributions to our culture. Gopher and the Sherlock Holmes collection.
Maybe not necessarily in that order.
Possibly not necessarily in that order.
Well, if you go on to archive.org, I know we can check back on Sherlockian.net as early as May of 2000. So that's
it certainly goes back some years before that, but I don't think archive.org goes back some years before that.
Right. Exactly. So when you set out with this idea to experiment with Sherlock Holmes to help inform your professional capabilities, and by the way, it's clear that you never lost that innate love of chemistry, wanting to, again, use this as a laboratory of sorts. How did you envision the site? What did you want to do? What did you want to convey to people?
I modestly wanted to provide links to everything Sherlockian that there was on the internet. and at that time, that wasn't hard to do. There were about 6 such links.
That's right.
But it got bigger and bigger.
And when did you first begin to notice this explosion of online activity?
I think it was a gradual thing. As more people were using the internet, more people were putting things on. I can still remember the saying somewhere probably in the mid to late 1990s. Most of the information on the internet is about the internet. And for a number of years that was true, and then suddenly it wasn't.
That is true. And certainly over the last, well, let's say the last 5 years or so, with the addition of social media as more of a mainstream, it's just been exponential. And I would imagine very difficult to keep up with.
It's very difficult to keep up with because of the amount and the complexity and the fact that most of what's being created now is not on the web. It's on other kinds of internet media. And in theory, it's possible to link to those, but it's messy and doesn't work very well.
Right. So at some point, I would imagine that your mission, your strategy had to move from documenting everything on the internet to something more concentrated and more manageable. How have you adjusted that as you've gone on?
It's been more controlled by how much time I can put into it. I try to get the most important things in there and accept that some things don't get in. If I could spend all my time at it and perhaps had a battalion of assistants, I could add pages and links and cover pretty near everything.
Well, and
but I'm not sure who would want it.
Well, I'll hold Bert's hand up. I know he'll refuse. But that's got to bring to mind, even Sherlock Holmes realized at some point in his career that he couldn't do it on his own, and that's why he engaged the irregulars to go everywhere and see everything and overhear everyone. Have you used your network of friends and Sherlockians online to help source information and to help inform what's the most important?
Only a little bit. I would like to have done more of that. From time to time, I put out a question on Twitter or on Facebook, where is such and such, or what is the important thing about this particular area of Sherlockian activity, and sometimes I get a suggestion or two, sometimes I don't. I've also 2 or 3 times asked somebody to create a particular page on the website. The example that I am the proudest of is a very nice curated list of the best fanfic, which was done by Eleanor Gray, herself the author of some quite well-known and quite brilliant fanfic. She put that together 3 or 4 years ago now, I think, with links to the best stuff that had been written at that time, and I think most of what's on there is classic and continues to be the best fanfic there is.
And that's all the best Sherlockian fanfic?
Right.
Okay.
Just Sherlockian. I think doing all fanfic would be an impossibility.
Yeah.
Although if anybody could do it, it might be Eleanor.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, you occasionally put out questions on Twitter and Facebook and so on. So for the record, if our listeners wanted to follow you on Twitter, how would they do that?
The Twitter is Dark Green Desk.
Ah, and where did that come from? The dark. Do you have a dark green desk? Would you like a dark green desk?
I have a desk with a dark green surface.
Oh,
Like a leather surface?
No, pine painted dark green. I would love to have a green baize table, the sort of thing that used to be on pool tables and the doors of college rooms. Green baize is a very Victorian surface, but I somehow have not gotten around to installing that.
Very good. And on Facebook, where are you on Facebook too?
Just under my name.
Oh, excellent. Yeah.
So if anyone is listening that operates in baize, reach out to Chris.
When I do math, I do it in base 10. So does that count?
Hardly.
And
now we're just going to pause a moment for a message from one of our sponsors.
Yes.
You know, when you head over to the website of the Baker Street Journal, you'll find so much more than just the journal itself. Christopher Morley once opined, never before has so much been written by so many, for so few, with respect to the journal. But about its website, he may have wondered, never before has so much been added to a website with such a narrow name. Because when you're on BakerStreetJournal.com, there are books, and more books from the Baker Street Irregulars Press that go well beyond the BSJ. Take the latest book, for example, Sherlock Holmes Behind the Canonical Screen. This volume provides a written record of virtually all of the presentations at the BSI's third conference in Los Angeles in 2012. The work of the 23 contributors, including Sherlockians, academics, and entertainment industry creative talent, are all represented here. Editors Lindsay Fay and Ashley Polasek have done an extraordinary job bringing together all of these works. This oversized volume is lavishly illustrated and will be an essential resource for the student of Sherlockian film and its place in the history of cinema. So go marvel at BakerStreetJournal.com and pick something that tickles your fancy today.
Well, it's interesting because we're talking to you about, your interest and background in medieval literature and how you adopted internet technology to make information available. And all of these things are connected, aren't they? I mean, Ronald Knox kicked off Sherlockian scholarship, some would say, some would argue that he didn't, by employing that technique of biblical exegesis to the literature of Sherlock Holmes. And look what happened. And, you have very similar and related interests, and you've been a prolific writer and speaker, employing, no doubt, a lot of what you observed in looking at and thinking about and learning about medieval literature to the topic of Sherlock Holmes and how you explore and explain these various ideas and relate one story to another. Is that too much of a reach? Am I reaching too much in my babbling about this?
No, I think that's exactly true. Just as my medieval literature degree wasn't directly applicable to doing public relations, institutional communications, but the skills are similar, and I think that's also true with what I've done with Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, in my experience, the people who do well in PR and marketing, which obviously includes Scott and some of us, are folks who learn how to think clearly and who can reduce complex issues to terms that are understandable and graspable by large audiences, and that's a very good training ground for that.
As for Ronald Knox and biblical studies being a background to Sherlock Holmes, that in turn connects to the spiritualizing Sherlock project that I have been involved in over the last 2 or 3 years. It hasn't progressed nearly as fast as we had originally hoped it would, but at some point maybe we'll get rolling on it.
Oh, what's that all about? What's spiritualizing? That sounds a bit Conan Doyle-ish now. We don't mean to say spiritualism, do we here?
We do not mean to say spiritualism. We mean teasing out the religious themes in the Sherlock Holmes stories. An astonishing amount has been written about religion in Sherlock Holmes.
You mean beyond sort of the resurrection of Holmes in
certainly the resurrection is one of the central themes, but there are a good many others. Holmes talks religion and philosophy with a rose in the Naval Treaty. He talks about the futility of life at the end of The Retired Colorman and in The Veiled Lodger and so on. Lindsay Colwell and I got very interested in this topic a couple of years ago and started a project to collect both notes on what's in the canon and notes on what's been written in Sherlockian scholarship about religious issues. That project got detoured by other things, but it still sort of exists. There is a section of the Sherlockian Net website that contains as much as we've done so far about it.
Oh, isn't that interesting? Well, that'll make for a great book. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that the idea, that you'll turn this into a book eventually?
Haven't got as far as knowing what the product might be. The one product has been an article that Lindsay and I co-authored in the BSI's manuscript series book about the empty house, talking about resurrection.
I remember that.
Well, it's fascinating. You know, there are so many of those references. I remember doing a paper some years ago which was built around the observation. Now, I'm sort of trying to remember this, so if it's not true, forgive me, but my vague memory is that the only time the word the devil is referred to as the evil one only once in the canon, in that very sort of peculiar construction. And I think it's in the Milverton case. Maybe not, but it was, my paper was all around that sort of unique appearance of the devil expressed as the evil one, and trying to draw conclusions from what significance might relate to that construction. So that's fascinating.
That would be a fragment of exactly the kind of thing that we were trying to collect, yes.
Well, Bert, didn't Sherlock Holmes in his introduction of himself to Dr. Watson say that he was the most lazy devil who ever stood in shoe leather?
Yes, probably. Yes. He also introduced himself as the Tasmanian devil right before he dropped that anvil on Baron Gruner. So.
There you go.
I think that was changed in the edition that I... Maybe.
Those editors.
Well, Chris, at the top of the show, we mentioned your existing publications, In Bed with Sherlock Holmes, Welcome to America, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, Sherlock Holmes Handbook. But there are two other books that are out currently, and one that is in the hopper, and we do want to cover those with you. Do you have any preference as to what order we discuss them?
I suppose chronological makes the most sense. The book that's called A Quick Succession of Subjects has been in the making for several decades, so perhaps it gets priority.
Yeah, this is a fantastic volume. A Quick Succession of Subjects, lectures and speeches on Sherlock Holmes. And you mentioned earlier that you have done a good deal of public speaking. Where did it start? Where did you get your beginning with getting up in front of other people and talking about Sherlock Holmes?
Most of the speaking that I've done has been in Sherlockian organizations. A few times I've been asked to seniors groups and that sort of thing, and happy to go and give a general background about this is who Sherlock Holmes is, this is who Arthur Conan Doyle was. But the sort of thing that makes it into this book almost entirely is talks for the bootmakers and Sherlockian conferences and a few miscellaneous Sherlockian venues.
And included in those are some toasts and whatnot. One of the ones that jumped out to me was actually, I think it was the last time you were at a BSI weekend in New York before this year, which you ended up this was astounding to me. You were given an investiture in 1965, 66? 66.
Good grief.
But in absentia, right? Back in those days.
They did a lot of those in those days.
Yeah, travel to New York was difficult, and, there were certainly Sherlockians around the world to recognize. Now, remind us, how old were you in 1966 when you received this investiture?
I was 16.
16.
In retrospect, it seems ridiculous, and I've come to the understanding that Julian Wolfe was not recognizing achievement, but trying to encourage potential. I hope he was right.
Well, then he was remarkably successful, clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we mentioned online on our site that you made it your way to New York earlier this year, January of 2016, for your first ever BSI dinner, 50 years after you received your investiture.
Yes. I figured 50 years was a good time to break the strain.
Good call. Which was astounding, and I hope you felt the warmth and the welcome of people that were very glad to see you there.
There were certainly a number of people who knew who I was, and it was nice to see some people I hadn't seen for quite a while.
So what I wanted to mention that stuck out to me in the book here was when you were down in New York for a BSI weekend, you actually attended the annual dinner of the adventuresses of Sherlock Holmes, which until that time had not admitted men to their proceedings. And this was something of a first. I think you were brought by a date, and you made a toast, which was speech-like in length, but it was very good. It was called "The Man Who Loved Women." You remember that occasion?
I do remember that. I came to New York for several of the January weekends in, I suppose, the early 1980s because of relationships and circumstances. And the first time that I came was the first year that the adventuresses invited men to attend their dinner, which was held on the same evening as the BSI dinner. There were no women irregulars at that time, so nobody had to make a choice. They invited me to come to that dinner. I was somehow able to get myself on the list of people making toasts, and having stood up to make a toast, took great advantage of being there and spoke for at least 10 minutes about men and women in the Sherlockian world and about Dr. Watson as the model of the man who loved women.
Yes, indeed, he was. Do you remember the reception to your talk, to your toast?
I don't. I imagine it was mostly relief when I finished.
Well, one of the things I really should point out, since we're talking about your talks, is that you have a lovely chapter in Quick Succession of Subjects from 2008, which includes your thoughts on how to give a good presentation. And it's one of my favorite sentences about the subject of giving talks is in this particular chapter where you say, and I quote, "As a result, you may have noticed most Sherlockian papers begin with one of two sentences. Either, 'Can you hear me at the back?' or, is this thing on?" And then you say, "I want to suggest very strongly that these are not the most impressive beginnings for a public presentation." And I can't tell you how many speeches I've written for people who I wish would have taken that advice.
I don't think that problem is unique to Sherlockian speakers by any means.
No.
Well, one problem that is unique to Sherlockian speakers is beginning with the phrase, "I was looking through my grandfather's attic."
Yes.
And that's where the inevitable lost manuscript of Watson's was found.
Yes.
Oh, what a unique approach, right?
Right. And I found these cobwebs, which I've brought some photographs of that I'd like to share with you.
Well, kind of tying the two subjects together that we've been talking about thus far, one of your talks, and this goes all the way back to July of 2001, was good old index.html, the future of Sherlock Holmes on the Internet.
One of the times I spoke at the University of Minnesota conference, yes.
And that's coming up, or actually that just occurred. Getting my recording date and my air date mixed up. That just occurred in Minneapolis with the Norwegian Explorers. So
every 3 years.
Every 3 years. And are you a regular attendee of that? Do you go every 3 years?
I haven't been to all, but I've been to several of them.
Okay. And would this have been the first back in 2001 that you attended, or were there others?
I don't remember whether that was the first Minnesota trip or not, to tell the truth.
Okay. Now, have you reread this talk recently?
I reread all of them when I was putting the material for the book together, which is more than a year ago now, but I haven't read most of them since the book appeared. No.
Okay. So we're talking
almost anything in there, really.
Yeah. So we're talking about a 14, 15-year gap between when it was written and when you reread it. Did anything jump out at you, talking about the future of the Internet in 2001? Did anything jump out to you as to, well, I missed the mark on that, or I was right on the mark with others?
Well, I think I missed the mark on the important thing, which was the invention of social media.
Well, I don't think anyone could have seen that coming in 2001, frankly.
Probably not, and yet it's the most important change, or one of the maybe most important changes in the Internet in that intervening time.
Sure.
The other being the pervasiveness of the Internet for daily life.
Right.
You no longer deliberately go to look something up. You're just constantly connected.
Now, how do you think Sherlock Holmes would have interacted in the age of the Internet?
I'm sure he would have found Internet tools extraordinarily useful, indispensable, but he might have found himself at less of a relative advantage than he was then. He could stay ahead of Scotland Yard and everybody else through his own peculiar knowledge and skills, and I think that the Internet has provided the potential to level that to a great degree.
He would have had to brush up on his mathematics skills because Moriarty would be using predictive analytics and big data to corrupt the world, and Holmes would have a new generation of Baker Street irregulars. They would all be algorithms, constantly searching to find these emanations of Moriarty's web.
Bots.
I don't know what you just said, but I'm sure you're right.
Well, we have a lot in common. I don't know what I've just said, and I'm certain I'm right. Now, that's interesting. See, that would make a very interesting little science fiction story. I wonder if anybody's done that.
I don't think there is anything that somebody has not done in fanfic, honestly.
Yeah, probably.
So in reviewing your talks, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this a comprehensive set of all of the major talks that you've done, or did you select just the ones that you wanted to include?
It was supposed to be comprehensive, but in fact, since it came out, I have discovered a couple of things that I did that I had forgotten about. Oh. In the days before laptop computers, I didn't necessarily have the text of everything I had ever written at my fingertips, so a couple of things escaped into file folders.
So looking at the ones that you did include, do you have a favorite?
I don't think so. I think the favorite is always the thing just done or the next thing that's about to be done.
And so what's the one that you just did at the Norwegian Explorers Conference?
Well, I don't get to talk at the Norwegian Explorers Conference this year.
Oh, no. Oh, how sad for them.
The theme of this year's conference, as I understand it, is all new speakers, people you haven't been forced to listen to before.
Well, they missed the mark on you by a good few decades, so glad you were speaking there earlier at other events.
Glad to have had that experience.
Yeah.
In 2013, I spoke at the Minnesota conference about color in the stories.
Ooh, that's interesting.
The emotional and dramatic effects that color words create and so on. How the dominant color in the Valley of Fear is black, and the Hound of the Baskervilles is dominated by green and gray.
Wow. That would be, it strikes me, not only could you do an interesting, kind of textual evaluation like that, but if you had a designer who could illustrate what, thematically what each story looked like with color, that could be interesting as well.
I think that would be fascinating.
Yeah.
One of the questions that comes up out of that is, of course, why is a study in scarlet when blood is not scarlet but crimson? Scarlet is an orangey red. Blood is a dark purpley crimson red. The answer seems to be that it's literary allusions to, in particular, the Bible talking about scarlet sin. Not blood, but sin that's scarlet.
That could be scarlet letter,
Yeah, but also the allusion, to a study as an artwork. Here's
and that's the other thing. A study in gray, the Whistler's
mother
work, and he has studies in other colors as well, were very fashionable just at that time.
Yeah. And also a case of crimson sounds like something you might ask a wine merchant for. That's not, you're not going to sell a lot of Beaton's Christmas annuals if you call it a case of crimson.
Case of crimson?
Yeah.
My initial reaction to that was that it sounded like a Perry Mason.
Oh, right.
It could be.
The curious case of the crimson and something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But how interesting the observation about color. I mean, again, relating it to something else, when Pixar, as an example, do their storyboards for the works that they develop, they have color themes and color palettes that run through the various arcs of their various episodes to reflect the emotional character of what's going on in the story and with the characters. So color as an influence is fascinating.
To apply that idea to Sherlock Holmes was not totally my idea. That actually originated in some work by a young woman called Wendy Mackin, who was an undergraduate student here at the University of Waterloo and did a paper for an English class, taking the colors out of, I think, just the novels, but at any rate, some of the Sherlock Holmes stories, and finding that gray and green in the Hound and so on. I was able to elaborate that and make some observations about it that turned it into a paper for Minnesota.
I love that. So, so that was that why the carbuncle was blue and the dragon was green? Was that
that's the talk in quest? Absolutely.
Excellent. That's of course featured in A Quick Succession of Subjects. Now, folks would like to get A Quick Succession of Subjects that is offered for sale by our friends at the Wessex Press. And what a great opportunity to pause and reflect on our sponsor.
Friends, while Great Britain will leave the European Union, the ancient Anglo-Saxon Kingdom of Wessex chooses to remain, preserving the future of the Wessex Press. And what better way to celebrate national self-determination than with a visit to WessexPress.com. If you followed Chris Redmond for 30 years and transcribed his best Sherlockian presentations, you'd have 27 essays on matters geographical, canonical, Sherlockian and Doylean, scholarly and spiritual, Gurlian and Boylean. But you would also have lost years of your life and seriously expanded your carbon footprint. Now you can banish remorse by buying your copy of A Quick Succession of Subjects for only $19.95. Friends, the sky is a canopy of incandescent blue, and the dappled sunlight lies golden on the grass. Summer is the time to reach for the pleasure only volumes from the Wessex Press can provide. Choose yours today.
And, of course, we want to get to your other book in print currently called Lives Beyond Baker Street, a biographical dictionary of Sherlock Holmes's contemporaries. Now, this is not your average Sherlockian encyclopedia or whatnot. On the reverse, it says, if you've ever read A Scandal in Bohemia and wondered what Watson's allusion to Mr. John Hare means, if you aren't sure who was in charge of in Southeast Asia when Mycroft Holmes mentions the present state of Siam, these and more. This is your book. We've got a one paragraph set of biographies for 800 individuals who were mentioned in the canon. Chris, how did this idea come about?
Like a lot of ideas, it's been stewing for a while. I've been interested in the historical people who are mentioned in the stories, and who therefore turn up in footnotes in the annotated Sherlock Holmes and so on. And I began to reflect that these people are really the background against which the stories happen. These are the people who were walking down Regent Street when Holmes and Watson were walking down Regent Street. These were the people who were in the newspapers that they read at 221B. Or, if you prefer, these are the people in the newspapers that Arthur Conan Doyle read as he was writing the stories. So I began to collect not just the individuals who are mentioned, but other individuals who might as well have been mentioned. Politicians and military heroes and criminals and detectives and courtesans and poets and painters and all the rest of the people in Victorian Britain and also in the United States and other parts of the world in that period, in the period when Holmes was active from about 1880 to 1902.
And so when did because I would imagine getting information together on 800 individuals is no mean feat. When did the work begin in earnest on this?
This was mostly my project for last year. Getting the information was not the difficult part because very basic information on historical people is easily available. An astonishing amount of the actual information in this book comes from nothing more subtle than Wikipedia, although there were some exceptions to that. But it was a matter of identifying who the people were who were worth including, and after finding the information, boiling it down and connecting it to Sherlock Holmes. How is this relevant to somebody who is reading Sherlock Holmes? How does this person help to color the background?
So that obviously included names that were explicitly mentioned in the canon, but what about those who weren't mentioned in the canon, who perhaps would have been some sort of societal, political, or other type of influence in the Victorian time? How did you determine who those people might be?
A good deal of random choice and whimsy, the people who caught my interest. I made sure that all the kings and all the prime ministers were included, for example,
right,
as well as all the prominent criminals. And then references here and there in the stories led me to other things. Watson speaks about Belgian painters and Holmes speaks about German composers. So who were the Belgian painters? Who were the German composers?
Of course.
In his last bow, there is a high-powered Benz automobile, which naturally led me to write 800 words about Carl Benz. And the interesting thing about Carl Benz was, in fact, not him, but his fiancée and then wife, Bertha Ringer, who was really responsible for there being an automobile industry.
And we actually have that write-up, that background write-up on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. It's called His Last Bow, The Power of Women.
Astonishing what connections there are when you start reading the fine print of the Sherlock Holmes stories and realizing that one of the things that makes these stories enduring is precisely these connections to daily life and history.
And we have you to thank, in part, for pulling these disparate strands together.
I just had a great time finding these people and writing about them one by one. Now, it got pretty tedious by the time I was at 795 out of 800. I was glad enough to see it finished. I finished the whole thing and then discovered I had left out Lily Langtry and had to find a way to shoehorn her in.
My goodness, of course.
Oh.
What interested me, because I am not a student of biographical dictionaries. This is the first that I've come across, and it's fascinating. But I was a little, I don't know, out of sorts, lost when I opened it up. It was not alphabetical. Can you explain the choice for ordering the individuals the way that you did?
There's a full alphabetical index, but in the main body of the book, the people are in the order of when they were born. So the book starts with people born in the 1790s who were old when Sherlock Holmes was young, and moves through his contemporaries and ends with people who were young when Sherlock Holmes was old.
So for those of our listeners who haven't seen this, what's the first entry and what's the last entry?
The first entry in the book, and I'm having to turn to the book myself to make sure, the first entry is George Womwell, who owned a traveling menagerie, and his name is mentioned in The Veiled Lodger. The circus proprietor in The Veiled Lodger is said to have been the rival of Sanger and Womwell, two great circus operators of their time. And in fact, the original Womwell was dead before that happened, but his name continued in the menagerie.
He was noted for his ingenuity in attracting customers. When his elephant died en route to London's annual Bartholomew Fair, he exhibited it anywhere with a notice promising the only dead elephant in the fair. Londoners would rarely get to see.
You sold me that elephant and told me he was sleeping.
Nailed to his perch, no doubt.
Right. Oh, no. The African grey always sleeps like that.
And this one works for less than peanuts.
Right. And what's the last entry?
The last entry in the book is Marjorie Kay, who played the heroine in the William Gillette film of Sherlock Holmes, released in 1916.
Oh.
So we go from a very old circus proprietor to a very young actress.
Indeed. And that as well led to another kind contribution that you made to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the mystery of William Gillette's romantic lead in the 1916 Sherlock Holmes film.
Right. Well done.
Marjorie Kay was a quite remarkable person. She was only a teenager when she made that film. Almost immediately afterwards, she went off to France as a First World War nurse, had a colorful, I hesitate to say scarlet, but colorful career in France, and came back to the United States and, among other things, posed for Red Cross recruiting posters. A lot of the research about Marjorie Kay was done with the help of Leah Gwynn, who is one of the most brilliant Sherlockian researchers we have these days. She very kindly helped me on several of these entries.
And, of course, Leah joined I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere with her erstwhile writing partner, Jamie Mahoney, on episode 95 to talk about a curious collection of dates.
Which is a wonderful book. I'm still reading it.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Really useful. So Lives Beyond Baker Street is available from our friends at MX Publishing. You can find them at mxpublishing.co.uk. Here in the U.S., mxpublishing.com. And is available there for $18.95.
Good price.
Indeed.
Well worth it. Well worth it.
Always $18.95.
Now you've got a third project coming up because clearly you're not busy enough in retirement. Your third project is a book called About 60: Why Every Sherlock Holmes Story is the Best. What's this all about?
Well, what this grows out of a talk that I gave in 1978, which is in fact the first of the talks in a quick succession of subjects. A talk in which I argued that the Boscombe Valley mystery is the best Sherlock Holmes story. I gave that talk to the bootmakers of Toronto at their annual dinner that year. It was the first significant Sherlockian talk I had ever given, and it was carefully reasoned and absolutely deadly boring. I was not a great speaker in those days, but nevertheless I made the case. And I thought at the time, and really ever since, wouldn't it be interesting to make a similar case for every Sherlock Holmes story, that every one is the best?
Now, you're putting yourself in that position to make the case for every single story?
Well, I imagined putting myself in that position, and then I decided I couldn't deal with 59-fold cognitive dissonance.
Smart man. So what did you do?
I decided that what I would do was find 60 people and get each of them to argue for one of the stories.
Excellent. Now, are you keeping your own argument for Boscombe Valley mystery, or did you get someone else to take that up?
No, someone else took that up.
Interesting. So you are just taking on an editorial role for this project then?
I was the editor. I wrote the introduction, and I also wrote a small thing that I've been describing as an Easter egg that people will find in this book when they read it.
Oh.
But the 60 chapters about the 60 stories were done by 60 people other than me.
And how did you recruit them?
I started with my friends and then kind of worked outwards. People suggested people who might be invited.
Okay. And did you have any trouble getting to 60 individuals, or was that fairly easy to find those hand raisers?
It was pretty easy to find. There were 3 or 4 who were unable to finish what they had started or what they had planned to start, and I had to find replacements in a couple of cases on fairly short notice. I was very pleased. Not only that nearly all of the 60 did it and did it by deadline, but that nearly all of the 60 did it really well on the first try.
Now, who is the maniac who said the Mazarin stone is the best?
You know, I was going to just ask that same question.
I don't think I'm going to answer that question until the book comes out.
Oh.
But I will say that I think an interesting and convincing case is made.
Oh, well.
As is true for nearly all of them.
Nearly all of them.
I did say in the original mandate to the authors, if you can't argue that this story is the best of them all, you can at least argue that it is the best of its kind. And a few people were rather ingenious in defining what kind it was the best of. But what has happened, what was done in every case, is that people were able to pull out, these are the things in this story that are interesting and significant and memorable and well above the average. These are the important things and the reason why we still value this story, even if it's not everyone's favorite.
That's fair enough.
I think that when the book is there in people's hands, it's going to be, for the long term, I think it's going to be a guide to what to look for in these stories, why we do value these stories, why each one of them is worth rereading in its singular way.
Yeah. What's the expected publication date?
I'm told the end of October, more or less, but the publisher is still in the early stages of working on the book, so we'll find out more definitely.
Okay. And who is your publisher for this one?
The publisher is Wildside Press, who are based in Maryland.
Okay.
They have done a few Sherlockian books and some mysteries. The mainstay of their work has been science fiction.
Interesting. Interesting. So you really shop around. You've got one book from Wessex Press, you've got one from MX Publishing, and now you'll have another from Wildside Press.
Whether that's me shopping around or the publishers not wishing to repeat an experience.
That's right. Well, now that gets to an interesting question. I mean, we've talked about medieval literature, biblical studies, spiritual Sherlock Holmes, science fiction, fan fiction. So, Chris Redmond, what is on your nightstand? What books are you reading right now?
About half the time, I have a pastiche going in one room of the house and something else in another room. Right at the moment, I also have an Alexander McCall Smith going, and have just started that book about the Guernsey Potato Peel Pie Society. I can't remember the title of it, as it's rather a long title, but Guernsey and Potato Peel Pie are in there somewhere.
Well, I haven't heard of that.
Eclectic would be the word, in short.
And what book have you read recently, that moved you to laugh? What book have you read recently that moved you to tears? What, when you look back on the things you've read, what sticks in your mind? Favorites? Going to a desert island? Getting on a plane ride? Have to take something with you? What?
I don't think I have a good answer to that.
No? Of all the books you read, do you keep them all? Do you give some away?
I get rid of a lot of books. There are just too many books that come through this house, and I feel obliged to keep all Sherlockian books.
What else? What else do you keep?
That I will want to refer to again. Books that have been given to me by somebody that matters.
Are there things you reread occasionally? I mean, obviously there's always a point in time where you go back and reread the canon, but every couple of years I like to go through the R. Austin Freeman, Dr. Thorndike series. I'm very fond of that. H.C. Bailey's Reggie Fortune. I like to read those every so often.
I haven't reread Dr. Thorndike in a long time. I expect it would repay rereading, and I want to reread Dorothy Sayers, but I haven't done that in a long time.
Oh yeah, every couple of years I go through her books. Yeah. Anything else? I mean, do you read contemporary novels? Do you read Michael Chabon? Ed O'Brien?
I read very, very little contemporary fiction. I expect I'd be better off if I did, but for the most part, not. I'll tell you two books that I treasure and won't get rid of, even if I haven't reread them much recently. One is a little book called 1066 and All That, which is a parody account of English history.
Yeah, that's a lot
classic
of fun.
Probably from the 1940s. It's a book my parents had when I was growing up.
Yeah, I have a copy of that somewhere. And what else?
Any other?
The other book that hardly anyone has ever heard of is called Mark It and Strike It. And it is the autobiography of Steve Allen, who was a television comedian and late-night host, and mystery novelist and various other things.
Yeah.
And it is the most wonderful book, alternately comedy and very serious reflection on society. A very humane book and very much worth rereading, and I always recommend it to people with no hope that they will be able to find it anywhere, and I'm sure not going to lend my copy.
What else? Have you read any Christopher Morley? Have you, do you like Morley?
I have read a few Christopher Morley. I have a great shelf full that, in fact, I'm in the process of selling to another Sherlockian who is more interested and more likely to have time to read the rest of them than I am. I frequently feel like the central figure in one of my favorite cartoons, the old gentleman sitting in his armchair in his library, surrounded by shelves that stretch to the ceiling. And somebody is walking up to him with a little flat wrapped parcel, clearly about 6 inches by 9. And he's saying, now I wonder what this could be.
Cufflinks. It's cufflinks, obviously.
Absolutely.
It's socks. I knew it. Well, Chris Redmond, this has been a fantastic conversation, wide-ranging, just like you. I think it reflects your interests, it reflects your scholarship and your wide range of connections online. So
Very kind of you not to put the word dilettante in there anywhere.
And very self-deprecating too, might I add. You are a pleasure and a treasure to the Sherlockian community, and thank you for being with us.
Amen.
What kind of things to say, and thank you for inviting me.
What a great conversation.
He's a wealth of information.
Well, as we've done these podcasts, and how interesting this is episode 99, because when I look back on the people that we've talked to, so many of them, such a good percentage, are folks that you say to yourself, boy, what a great dinner companion this would be.
We need more like that.
Yeah. But what a wide range of interests,
Oh, it's incredible.
Fascinating.
It's funny because when you think about Chris's Sherlockian career spanning, 50 years or more, a lot of people get burned out over time in this thing, especially when they've been doing a lot of scholarship on it, been very involved. And yet, here Chris is with not only new works, but new concepts, really, and looking at deep things. Like the spiritualizing Sherlock Holmes project.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, just amazing stuff coming from him still. We hope that it continues for many years.
Yeah. Well, some people find a way, to make this a great channel of constant creativity, as he did with the idea of saying, which I thought was very clever, of saying to people, look, if you can't make a case that this is the best Sherlockian story, maybe you can make a case that this is the best of its kind. And then people being clever enough to, sort of stretch, apparently, the idea of what kind it is. So.
Right.
Yeah, very interesting. Friends, every great writer needs a great work table. That's why you need the new Sherlock Holmes brand Dark Green Desk. Our dark green desk is made of natural, renewable wood, with the top covered in flawless green felt, gently removed from the ancient billiard tables of British clubland. It's the only dark green desk that delivers the 3 C's. Constant, comfortable, creativity. Don't be fooled by creaky dark green desks that need hours of assembly with tiny Swedish wrenches. You'll be amazed at the bays when you buy the new dark green desk from your local Sherlock Holmes brand retailer today.
That's great. Well, have we done it again?
We have done it again. I think we've more than done it again. But boy, what a great interview!
Indeed.
So I think the only thing that's left for us to say is for you to admit that you're Scott Monty, probably.
Well, I will, but after this one quick reminder, actually 2 quick reminders, I lie.
Yep. Well, that's one. What's the second one?
1 and 3.
Oh, not very quick.
Then if you like what you hear, and if you would like us to do more of the same, we could do with your support. Whether it is a quick donation on PayPal, or whether it is something more significant like the support of people like Mary Miller.
Oh, Saint Mary Miller.
I know, on Patreon. Patreon.com/I Hear of Sherlock, or click that orange Become a Supporter button on our site, where you can help support each individual episode that is released, as many or as few as you like, to show people that you support the great things that we're doing here. This is a labor of love for us. We do have some modest sponsorships coming in, but your patronage would certainly be appreciated as well. So
yes, very much so. I mean, we began this, when did we begin, I Hear of Sherlock? In 2007?
In June of 2007. That's right.
All right, so
the website began in August of 2005, and then we added the audio program in June of 2007.
So it's 9 happy years.
9 years.
So what you could do is give us $1 a year, $9, or $1 an episode, $99.
But why stop there? Why not $50 an episode?
Yes. Start small. Start with a penny and raise it to $1.
That's great. Well, here's the thing. We've been in business for 9 years. We are coming up. Next episode, the very next episode, is our 100th episode.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, happy anniversary, happy anniversary, happy anniversary, happy anniversary. Pour a cheerful toast and fill it, happy anniversary. But be careful you don't spill it, happy anniversary. Oh.
It's astounding, isn't it?
Yep.
Astounding that we've been going 9 years and we've only got 100 episodes.
That's right. So tiny.
We took a hiatus for a while, for about 18 months, if you can believe that. But we got back on track. We gave ourselves a more reasonable schedule. Now we're in this cadence of one show every 2 weeks, and every other show is an interview show. But we may have more in store for you soon. So stay tuned to hear exactly what the future of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is going to sound and feel like. And of course, stay tuned for our very next episode, the centenary episode, marking 100 I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere episodes coming to you in your ears, in your head, throughout your room, throughout your house, throughout your car, wherever you happen to catch us. And we thank you for that. And now I am free to say,
Yes.
I'm Scott Monty.
Oh, my goodness, that's right. And I'm Bert Wolder.
And together we say
all the time, the game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, my goodness.
What's that?
I picked up my phone, and I have a text message from the local police department, and they say, a black bear has been sighted roaming in the area of Myrtle Avenue by Mountain Avenue. Residents of that area are advised to keep all small children and pets indoors. That's something?
That is.
Here's something you don't see every day on your phone.